then we would we'll try to just keep it for record keeping sake, right? So Mubanga is the author of Shipi Kisha, a novel forthcoming from Sank Books 2026, winner of the 2024 Sank Prize for Fiction Publications to the Wounded Stories, obligation to the Wounded Stories that was published at the University of Pittsburgh Press 2024. Winner of the 2024 Drew Haynes Literature Prize and finalist for the 2025 Minnesota Book Award. Another Mother Does Not Come Home When Yours Dies. Poems forthcoming from Wayfarer Books 2025. Finalist for the 2023 Center for African American Poetry and Poetics CAP Book Prize. Unmarked Grave, Tusculum, University Press 2022. Winner of the 2023 Tusculum Review Poetry Chapbook Prize and the Morning Bed, Jacana 2019. Winner of the 2018 and 2019 Diane Debut Fiction Award. Her creative work has also appeared in Hada, Asteroids, Isele, Contemporary Fast 2, Pele, Overland, and on Netflix and elsewhere. Her editorial work can be found or is forthcoming in Shenodoa, the Waterstone Review, the White Literary Magazine, and Safondi. She founded Ibuale Literary Magazine and co-founded Idembeka Creative Writing Workshop. When she is not writing or editing, Mubanga serves as a mentor at the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. She is currently a PhD student in the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, where she is also an interdisciplinary center for the study of global change scholar. Our research centers on autoethnographic study of the lives of Zambian married women who are long-time survivors of HIV. You are welcome, Mubanga. Autoethnography is a kind of method that's quite dear to my heart, and I'm really, interested in it. And so happy to learn that you are using that particular method to investigate Zambia women. Thank you so much for joining us today. Rafiat Aliyu was born and raised in Nigeria. She has an MFA in creative writing from North Carolina State University. A short story, 58 Rules to Ensure Your Husband Loves You Forever, was longlisted for the 2018 Writing Short Story Prize and has been translated into Spanish and Japanese. She received the Norway's Common Scholarship to attend the Clarion West Workshop for Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers in 2018. In 2020, she was one of the three African writers selected for the AKO King Prize Online with Vimba Mentorship Program, which culminated in the story, The Land of Prophetic Women, published in A Mind to Silence and Other Stories, the King Prize for African Writing. La Napole Art Foundation International Residency and La Mason Baldwin have supported her work. Rafiat is a 2023 Moreland Scholar. Her manuscript, To Wake in Happiness, is longlisted for the Highland Prize 2025. So, thank you for joining us. I will leave the platform to Rafiat and Mubanga, and they can steer the course of of our program for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jide, for that introduction. So this conversation is going to be very easy, very smooth flowing between Mubanga and I. We want to start with the reading. She'll read like one or two poems, Usually Mubanga prefers for us to, like, for me to choose the poem that she would read, for whoever's hosting to choose the poem. And I've selected Dream and Moana from the collection. So Mubanga, please read for us.
As you wish. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read Moana out loud, so maybe I'll start with that one and then I'll go to Dream because that one's a bit longer. So if you
Okay.
have a copy of the collection, Moana is on page 10. It starts on page anyway, it's one of the longer ones. Moana goes, Moana escapes into the world before the veins which breed children curdle. Here, mothers are still sacred caves, babies are just babies, rain not yet venomous. Pain searing open sores into dewy skin, this is the January of old. The sunrise here is ablaze, bleeding pigment into every body. The international news is still blaming the rising death toll on gay men. Even in this post-grid age, but no one is counting women, infants. The year is 1988, in a land carved to mirror a butterfly mid-flight by the insatiable hands of 1964. Under the curfews, caged shops, unfettered movement, but they cling still to that God, in his fair and in his justice. In the power of frenzied little prayers, in believing Psalm 105:15, in touch not my anointed, and Exodus 15:26, and I am the Lord who heals you. Moana's sibling is delivered 2 years belated, this iteration of the womb already hostile, a once snug home now a howling, devouring drum. This is May, and 1990 is frigid quiet. This sibling escaped too fragile for the hard mouth of a bruised world. The year is 1996. The nurses are jaded, the politicians are jaded, the journalists are jaded, the morticians are jaded. Now all that kangaroo care is rendered futile, the breastfeeding futile, the education, tenderness futile, futile. The measles vaccine, the hospital is futile. The doctor's pen, futile. Her 6 years, futile. The final fraction of a smile on a budding face, futile. The mauve box holding the body too small, futile. The funeral wailing, the little iridescent dress, the demise itself, fucking futile. Mona stands over a rusting spade of just-turned April ground. In her 10-year-old fingers, ground sours that instant a favorite season tilts, no longer a fulfilled promise of sheets of rain knocking against locked windows or soft guavas landing split. Moana's mother bringing in a withering smile, a tray of steaming sweet potatoes, sugared milk tea, waiting for inswa in that pre-morning, collected in flaking metal bowls from disintegrating corners of houses to be sizzled later over a fire, snacked on, that taste galaxies better than popped corn, but still joy wilts. Dust to dust, the preacher calls it, ashes to ashes, as Moana tosses it. Mangoes itself inside her nostrils now, the aroma of starved earth, the brilliant white of a mother's new confinement, waiting to receive it, a pumpkin seed that now will never sprout. Moana returns a final time, sardined by the broad-leaved shepherd's trees and the blistered stones on hardened sand. 2 decades between the first and this, but her dance is from memory. To falter past the box, to pause at the glass, to attempt recognition at this sunken face, to free a river of tears, to welcome faceless hugs. Moana's mind has stalked this terrain in dreams until they've insisted on her presence. When parents call a Moana, she must answer, Nkwai, with her mother's voice and the slits her father lent her for a mouth. Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor your mother and your father that you may live a long life. Demand ancestors' intonations raw. Moana has waited too long. The soil is already belching weeds. This excavation is futile. Moana will never find the sister, mother, father. A laugh slams itself into her chest. Raptures convoluted. a whimper. Okay. And then which one did you ask me to read? Dream?
Yes, dream.
Okay. Dream is page 52.
52.
Yes. Dream. In Dream, I am 10 going on 36 when my mother holds me like a petal and considers her creation. Her afro is strangled in a puff, the gray highlights winking in the sun. She is 33 going on 60, and it's warm here, a sun I used to know. She kisses me on the cheek, plants a disappearing red stain, which I tried to coax with one cupped palm. Stay, stay. I love you, she says. A plume of breath. I am so proud. A half whisper. Thank you, I want to tell her, and where the hell have you been? But my alarm springs to life, the phone screen an insistent blue, and spirit descends into body again, the room stiff and whole again. Here, she is forever 33.
Thank you so much for that reading, Mubanga. Part of the reason why I chose these two poems is one especially captures a lot of the themes that are present in the book. You know, with the book's title, I entered in expecting it to be mostly about motherhood and about your mother. And obviously, don't get me wrong, those themes are there. But one other theme that really stood out to me was language. And I think that's the thing about poetry. When I'm reading it on the page and I'm hearing you speak, is like those jokes that have been going around about how people who read so much never know how to pronounce words right, you know, because we're reading it in our heads, but then hearing this in your voice really helps put that into perspective. So I kept thinking a lot about like language as I read this and as I revisited it for this conversation. I'm aware that you speak many languages and you touched on it within the book. You really use them effortlessly in these pages. I obviously we see them in poem titles. We also see them within the text. Sometimes you translate, other times you don't. Language is linked to your childhood growing up, even in education, where you talk about how, like, in school, and I guess many of us who grew up in the continent can relate with having been forced to speak English in school rather than our native or our mother tongues. And then also with religion. So we catch glimpses of words from the Bible, as we've seen in Wana, but also song titles in other parts of the book. So there's this intersection also between language I saw and voiced and voiceless. But my first question is taking us all the way back to the preface, and that comes after the table of contents. I've read a couple of your works, and I've noticed you tend to open with proverbs. So we can obviously speak about the significance of proverbs in African languages and how they add to like a poetic factor when languages are spoken. But I really wanted to know what proverbs mean to you as someone who speaks multiple Zambian languages and how you go through the process of selecting proverbs for your works.
Yeah, I love these questions because I feel like I would probably have a different answer depending on when you're asking me the question, which is to say that the answer to this question for me evolves. So in poetry itself, I, I was a very resistant poet, which is to say that I didn't think that poetry was a space that I could exist in and tell a story that I wanted to tell. But my MFA program required you to take a class out of your primary genre, several classes outside of your primary genre. So my primary genre was fiction. And the semester when I was due to take a class, I briefly considered taking creative nonfiction because I thought that would be like the easiest transition. At least I was going like from prose to prose. But creative nonfiction, the intro class wasn't available that semester, so I had to take poetry. And one of the things that I just kept saying in the class was, I don't know, I feel like in order to begin writing poetry, the first sort of idea that was in my head was proverbs. I was thinking like, if I had to tell a poem in Bemba, what would be my starting point? And I was thinking Bemba specifically because when at least my earliest memory of being in school is in Luansha. And so there was that demarcation between the languages that we spoke basically as soon as we got out of the classroom, as soon as we got out of the school building, and the language that we spoke at school, right? And outside of school, we spoke Bemba. But my primary school, when I went to a government primary school, we had like a special time block during the day when we were allowed to speak Bemba without repercussion. And it was all we did was tell stories. So literally you would just take turns and people would tell these like very elaborate stories. And I think I was thinking about that as a sort of introduction to storytelling for me. And going back to that when I was in a genre that felt like unfamiliar, like, using a language, yes, but also like metaphorically using a language that felt more like I knew the tools to use in there. So when I first started writing poems, I would think about proverbs that meant a lot to me or proverbs that I had grown up hearing really frequently. And I would write a poem in conversation with that proverb. Often the poem would be, I guess, negotiating where it finds a truth in that proverb and where it feels like like the proverb doesn't apply necessarily, especially to my life. So that was my beginning, but it has bled through, in my fiction lately. Like I often like to begin with proverbs. And I think, I mean, initially when I first started writing prose and I was going in and out of English, I wasn't thinking about it consciously. Like I wasn't thinking, okay, now I want to go to Bemba, or now I want to go to Nyanja, now I want to go to Tonga. I was just thinking about the way that I talk. And because I speak multiple languages, like there are certain friends who I only speak to Bemba with, and there are certain friends that I only speak in Nyanja with. Most of the time, was slipping in and out of one of those languages and English. And so when I'm creating my characters, and a lot of my characters are in Lusaka or other cities that I've been in, I just can't conceive uh a character that only speaks English in at least in my generation of Zambia. Like I can't conceive a character that only speaks English. They'll speak, even if they only speak English, they'll speak as Zambian English, right? Like they'll their intonations will be so that it just happens organically. But in my longer pieces, the proverb tends to come last, just because the longer piece takes a long time to evolve and become its final self. So when the story feels like fully complete, then I'm like, yeah, what is this? What is the heart of this story? And what proverb? And I also like that. So in primary school, everything was being taught in English except for that 1 hour when you were speaking in Bemba. And my little rebellion is that I start my story with the proverb and I start it with the mother tongue before the translation, so that before you read my text, you're forced to read my mother tongue first before you have to read the rest of the text in English. And yeah, I like that.
I really like that too. It's interesting to learn that, most of your work is I guess, in conversation with proverbs that have already, probably existed for millennia
Yeah,
even.
yeah.
So my second question is still on the topic of language, but then I was also thinking in terms of prayer. So
Mm.
I don't know if we've mentioned this already, but so it's a book of poems, but Mubanga also has essays in different, like opening each part of the book. So some of these essays, you're talking about your experiences, take with your mom going to church, or not just going to like religious settings. The very first essay was, because I said church, but no, it took place in the pastor's house. Like it was just a meeting, right? And I just kept revisiting this idea of like language and prayer, because you ask, what language does God speak? That's the essay that appears in the first part. And then in part two, you said, how would our Father in heaven answer when I don't even speak his language?
Mm.
So my question for you is, does learning how to pray mean one has gained a new language?
Um, so this makes me think of, so my mom was Pentecostal. And one of my early memories of my mom, we used to pray in the routine settings. We pray before a meal, we pray before bed. And my mom was really very like, children should pray first. Like my mom is like, God will listen to the children. So whatever it is, like if my mom isn't feeling well, even if a preacher comes to the house and says, I want to, my mom will be like, no, let my daughter pray. Like, Go to hear the little children. I remember like thinking, what does that mean? Like, could I just ask for anything? And she also used to teach me this sort of like silent prayer. So I often used to go with like a list. I remember this long period in my life when my only prayer was, Dear God, give me a bicycle. Every single night, nothing else. But yes, I do think it's definitely a new language, and I think there's a way that I felt outside of that language in observing my mother pray, and especially observing her pray amongst her peers. Like there were moments when, especially when we would go to church on Sunday, when these big groups of people are praying in tongues, right?
Yes.
And I remember after a while, if because we would sit in the same spot. But I remember after a while of going to the same church over and over again, you would begin to hear the same, almost like the same beats, almost like a song, coming from specific people. Like if I turned, I would look to this person and know that's this person's language of prayer. Yeah, so in that sense, I've never thought about it, but in that sense, yes, it can feel like acquiring a new language for sure. And also there's a way that sometimes when people would pray, and they are praying in English, my mom would pray sometimes in very formal sounding English, that was different from day to day English. And perhaps that's what she meant by like, oh, let the little child pray. Because when you're small, like you don't have first of all, you don't have the vocabulary, even if you want to use it. But second of all, maybe you haven't gotten to that sense of like consciousness or like separateness between you and the God figure that you're being introduced to. So you use your everyday language, which is probably why I was going in and just saying, God, please, a bicycle, and then that's it. Yeah, so yeah, I do think it's an acquired language. I don't know that I've ever learned it completely. I think in the moments when I have prayed, it's almost always been silent.
Mm,
It's almost always been,
yeah. Mm.
yeah.
I like that you touched on the tongues because there was a part where like you had an experience with that as well, like
Really?
in one of the essays. Really, that's how I read it.
With my mom,
But
I'm probably writing about my
your
mom.
mom did. Okay, okay. But I got this sense that you were either trying to mimic her in a way or wanting to like copy her. Um,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I
Um, and
know
that
what.
got me, yeah.
Okay.
But I was wondering like about the intersection as well of like especially in that scene or in that essay, how we inherit, these languages, I guess, from our parents, not just the language that we speak, but as you've said, the language of prayer
Mhm.
and, the mannerisms and every other thing that we sort of inherit from them, which is also something that, many of your poems touch on.
Mhm.
Um, but speaking on the topic of inheritance, or did you have something to say on that?
No, I'm just pondering on the things inherited through language, like what things are inherited through observation and what things are inherited a bit more subtly. I'm not
Mm,
sure. I'm not sure. I wish I could have that conversation with my mother and hear her say, things like that. I do love when people find similarities in me and her, but I hear my mother's voice most strongly in actually just one
mm,
situation, which is uh I I love playing outside. So I'd be playing outside all day until literally the very last second. And unless it was on my terms, I didn't like coming back to the house. So if my mom called me like in the middle of the street, I'm playing in the middle of the street, like at the end of the street, and my mom called me, I remember just feeling like, why is this one inconveniencing me? Like, why are you calling me? And instead of saying Mkwai, like I said in the book, I would say Nishi, which is what? Which I only had the bravery to say because I'm far from home, right? Like she's not going to do anything to me in the middle of the road. And my mom was very soft spoken. And so I would go there like expecting her to be really upset. Like, why would you answer me like that? But I remember one time I had been doing it so frequently. And I remember one time I walked back into the house and she said, one day Okakana ice cream because I loved ice cream. right? And she said, one day I'll be calling you for something like I won't be calling you to tell you to take your clothes off the line or whatever. And I say that to my kids so many times. Like, that's the one place where my mother's voice travels to me. I'm like, one day we'll get an ice cream.
So
Yeah.
basically, one day they'll call you for ice cream and you will not answer.
And you'll be rude. Yeah. You'll be thinking they're calling you for inconvenience. And she used to say, like, if I call you and you say Nishi and I'm calling you for ice cream, I'm not going to give you that ice cream.
You're not getting ice cream.
You're not getting ice. Yeah.
Yes. So, which brings me to my third point, about inheritance, but specifically about birth and death. We saw that, Emmanuel, the part you read, you talked about like the womb. I really liked the line that talked about galaxies like popcorn. Underlined that. But I kept thinking about birth and death, and obviously we know that those are natural circles in life. But then also thinking about another poem that stood out to me, Love Letters from My Father's Daughter. And in that you write, death didn't take everything after all, when you're looking at yourself and seeing physical traits that your father like sort of gave you. And I was curious to know like how you approach death and life, like outside your poetry,
Mhm.
both in and outside your poetry, basically.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about death is basically, I've thought about death every day of my life since I was 8 years old. And so sometimes when I guess like for a while before as a writer, I didn't realize, I just, I was young and I thought, I guess everybody thinks about it this frequently. But I think encountering it that young, someone so close to you and you not fully understanding what or why it occurred, or why it occurred in that way, has made it this sort of like something that's constantly there for me. And I think when I even my timelines, when I'm thinking about timelines in my text, the timelines would often be split between before my mother died and after my mother died, even if it's fictional. The way that I know that the way that I'm seeing the world before 1998 and the way that I'm seeing it after are completely different. And I think the way that it shows up often is people are different when they've known death, when they've known what it is to know and love someone and for that person to die. And people are also different depending on when that knowledge came to them. There's an innocence that there's an innocence, an unexplainable innocence, even despite all the other hardness that the world will undoubtedly give you. There's an innocence that's there before the death of a parent. Um, and that's something that I recognize very quickly in people when I'm talking to them, which isn't a judgment on their character. It's just an observation, like, oh, this person doesn't know yet. And then I remember myself before I knew, or how I became, or how I saw things after I knew. And I think it's just something that's just always there, even when the character I'm writing, their parents don't die or nobody dies. I think it just shows up in like, I know how different they could be if that was the story that I wrote. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely understand what you mean. It's conversations we've had together, like, because we sort of have similar experience with losing. I lost my youngest sister and also my dad, like when I was really young, and it does change how you view your life. And I've also like had similar thoughts to what you've had before, like, because when I talk to people, I remember the first time I realized that I was also always thinking about death, like every single day when I wake up, whatever I do. And I was talking to somebody who did not understand. It's like, why are you so obsessed with death? You should be up and out living your life. And I'm like, because you haven't lost your parents, both your parents are alive, all your siblings are alive. So you don't really understand, why, because they saw it as a bad thing. But to me, I was like, it's just like a fact of life.
It's a fact of
Um,
life.
yeah.
I think you almost feel like you almost feel like you're shielding yourself, like you almost feel like you're like bracing yourself, like, oh, it's gonna happen. uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how necessary to get around it, but I think especially when it happens to you when you're so young, that you just haven't experienced enough of the world to give you that
Mm,
balance, right? So now
mm-hmm.
this thing becomes such a big part of how you interpret everything. It becomes like the funnel. Everything runs through that.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, exactly that. But also thinking in terms of creative practice,
Mm,
I say this thing that when I write, I like to exercise my like do a whole exorcism of my grief on the
mm,
page. And I wondered if that was something that you considered yourself doing as well, especially since you revisit themes of your family, your mother, your sister, your dad. Is it something that you consider like if you're writing, you're getting rid of the grief? Or maybe not getting rid of it, because I've noticed that, I mean, I can say that grief is a lifelong process. You keep revisiting and you keep thinking about it.
yeah.
But would you like identify with that?
I mean, I think it is for me anyway. It's not something that has gone away. It's something that has
Mm,
just changed. And I think as it is a lifelong process, it's also like a lifelong learning process. So, each cycle of grief teaches me something new about myself. But what I appreciate more is that it teaches me something. It has taught me different things about the people that I grieve and sometimes the relationships that I grieve. And the knowledge doesn't always come from the sense of loss. Sometimes the knowledge comes from the things that I have right now, right? So sometimes the knowledge comes from how I'm experiencing parenthood, or how I'm experiencing challenges in life. Like I've been telling you recently how um a lot of my thoughts have been veering towards my father, and I've always been told that I look like him. But there are ways that I'm recognizing him in the internal parts of myself, in the parts of myself that other people don't perceive, that other people don't look at me and say, this is like your father. And it gives me so much more empathy for him. And for me, it allows me to paint him out, right? Like give him some hues that he maybe didn't have before I walked into those phases of life that allowed me to understand him in a different way. But it's also a knowing that they are also parts that I will never know in a way that we will never know other people completely. But if they're alive, at least there's the opportunity to ask them. There's an opportunity to probe. So there's also that. But yeah, a lifelong process, but definitely not a lifelong sadness. There's periods of that, surely, but yeah, just an evolving, peaks and valleys. Hmm.
yeah, I really like that image of, the evolving peaks and valleys. And it's interesting what you said about experiencing like sort of, you're revisiting your father right now. And it occurred to me as I was reading a number of the poems in this work, they have like a very singular focus when it comes to their family. Like for example, maybe you have the essays with you and your mom, and then the poems with you and your dad. And then there was also the another one I liked was you talking to your son after he watches Bambi, which
mm,
also had themes of like grief and death.
mm,
And it just made me think about family and also about how we experience family, considering how much you lost at a very young age. Are your memories sort of like broken down in that aspect where like you see one member of the family, or do you see everyone together? Because I didn't get a sense that you saw
Oh, I had
everyone
never
together.
thought about that. I never thought about that. I don't think I see everyone together. And I mean, that's partly because we didn't always live together. We lived together for a very brief period of time. And then in that, we lived together for like 3 years. And then that 3 years, one person died every year, right? But I wonder too if even in units where people are living with their whole family, I mean, if they are thinking about people in sections, because my son had that reaction to Bambi, but he had been watching The Lion King for years, right? And me personally, I can't watch that scene again, not of Mufasa dying, but of Simba realizing that he's dying, right? But my son, he can watch that scene. He loves Lion King. And it didn't hit him in the same way as when he watched Bambi one time, and he's never asked to watch it again. And so I wonder if he, sections it out as well, like has people in blocks. Um, Yeah, I think they're
Oh, I
separate.
wonder if, oh, sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if maybe you could just, for people who haven't read the poem, just give a brief explain of what happens in it.
Yeah, okay. So this is an essay that I wrote. It's a flash essay. It's called Tucked In. So until very recently, I used to tuck my son in when he goes to bed. My younger son, he's 10 now. I wrote it when he was about 8, I think. Yeah. And I used to tuck him in before bed. So for context, he loves lions and he loves the Lion King, and he absolutely will watch the Lion King every single day. But that one day, I don't know, we got a break from the Lion King and he watched Bambi. And I was putting him to bed at night, and we go through a routine, talk about our day, talk about our nights. And he asks me very difficult questions, routinely asks me very difficult questions. This was one of the questions. So he, I guess he was thinking about how that, in Bambi, the mother dies, and he was empathizing with the child that's left behind. And he asked, "Are you gonna die?" And he just asked it like that, right? And it was interesting to me because when he's watching The Lion King, he understands what the circle of life means, right? Because it's explained in there. The animals die and they decompose, and the other animals eat the grass, and so on and so forth. And I said, yes, I am going to die. And he said, when? And just very calmly, when? And I said something like, not anytime soon, hopefully I'll die when I'm really, really old, and you're really, really old, and your kids are older, or that kind of thing. But he also knows that my mom died because I talk to them about my mom. I talk about my mom a lot. They've seen her pictures, and I see similarities sometimes in there. So I'll say, oh, you do that like my mom. And he says, oh, like he didn't believe me that I wouldn't die while he was young, not just because of the film. I thought it was because of the film, but then he said, um, but your mom died. Your mom died when you were little, right? So he was basically asking me for a guarantee. Like, how can you promise me that you are going to be here? And I've just never forgotten it. He barely remembers it, so he says, because when I published the essay, I showed it to him, and the only thing he asked was, "Oh, how come you didn't say my name? This essay is about me, and you didn't write my name, so the people who read it are not even going to know that it's about me." He's very keen to get older and Google himself and find his name. So he asked me, "Do you write about me?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How come when I Google myself, I don't see anything? I don't see anything." So I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit when he's older. But yeah, that's what that day was.
Thank you. I realize we're in this time for Q&A. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat here, so if anyone wants to pipe up and ask questions to Mubanga about the book or about writing or anything.
Mhm. Um, yeah.
Okay,
I
I
okay.
can start if no one is asking. Or what I will say is that if there is any, because you've taken some time to ask questions back and forth, maybe you can read a short poem for us to give us a breather, and then people can ask questions.
Um, yeah.
Okay,
I'll
thank
do
you.
that.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, someone's asked the question, so they've saved me. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Hussein has asked, how do you decide on what to leave out and leave out when you write about family? What do
Mhm.
you think? Yes, that's a good one.
Um, Yeah, for I rarely write about people who are still living, although there are people in my family that are still living that have had a very strong impact on my life. When I do write about those people, one of the things that I leave out is their names. Even though the things that have happened with them are definitely my story, and I, believe that I have the right to tell that story. I also just like to honor people's, privacy. I don't think I need to include their names in order to tell their stories. So often when I'm writing about people who are living, you won't see their names, just like in the essay about my child. Um, so that's one of the things I do. It depends from piece to piece as far as like a thing that happened, like context, like what to exclude. I try and remain as honest as I can be without um without being too I want to say there's a different word I'm leaning into, but maybe a close one is judgmental. I try not to be very judgmental towards even the people that are not living, especially the adults. I don't think I'm judgmental towards my sister because she was just a baby, but I think I can be towards my parents in the way that a lot of children can be. But I try and balance it out and really think through like what was going on. I try and give them grace as well. Yeah. Do I have a favorite poem in the collection? Yes. I always have a favorite. Listen, in real life, you can't, if I have 10 children, I'm not allowed to have favorites. I'm just supposed to divide myself between 10. But fortunately, poems and stories, they're not going to rise up one day and be like, oh, you gave Joseph the multicolored jacket. It's fine. So I do have favorites. My favorite poem is I think it's the second piece in the collection, or yeah, the second piece, Love Letters from My Father's Daughter, because it came to me by surprise. I was having a conversation with my best friend. I think I was in the phase of grief that's anger, but specifically anger at my father. And then I said it quite out of the blue. I said, I think if I had been closer to my dad, I'd have been quite a daddy's girl. And then I started digging into that, why I said that and what that was about. And I was thinking about how the snippets of my father that I knew, and the little bits that I'm learning over the years, and the ways that I still love him, uh, even though he's very flawed. And yeah, that's why it's my favorite. I write about my mom a lot, but this one was very surprising, and I love every part of that poem. Yeah. Um, Chinua is asking me something about Bible verses that I used in the book. Bible verses are very attached to my mom because my mom spoke not in Proverbs but in Bible verses. Like my mom was very like if she's giving you an instruction or a scolding, she would tie it to a Bible verse. So, but I think I use them in the collection the way I use Proverbs. Like if I put a Bible verse there, I'm like, is this true for me or not? Right? For instance, I've been seeing discourse recently that's been talking about honor your mother and your father so that you may live long, right? And a lot of at least Zambian kids, like you know your parents are reminding you of that verse if you do anything that you're not supposed to do, or if the preacher brings it up at church, your mom is looking at you like, see, the you're not listening. But I've been seeing a lot of discourse recently talking about the next verse in that passage, which I haven't read in a long time. But the next verse says, parents don't provoke your children into anger. So often when I use a Bible verse, I'm using it in a way of like trying to pull what about this verse feels true to me, and what about this verse doesn't quite fit into the narrative that I'm telling here. So in Mana, I think I talk about like I use the one that I'm remembering right now is not just honor your mother and your father. Honor your mother and your father is connected to the previous stanza where it says, when a parent's call, she must answer, right? But in this poem, the parents are dead. So the call itself can never fully be answered, or it can't be answered in the real, in the sense that she might want to. So I tend to use them that way. Or even in Our Father, where I write it in the beats of the Lord's Prayer. And I'm thinking about what does it mean for a prayer to be answered? And if there are two people praying opposing prayers and God is answering everybody's prayer, but only one person's prayer. So whose prayer is answered and whose prayer isn't answered? So I think I use them in the same way that I use Proverbs. How do I hold on to hope as I write? Hope is my mother's name, so there's that. My son's name, one of my son's names is also an interpretation of my mom's name. So he likes to make jokes of like if we use the word hope in a sentence, he'll be like, "Are you talking about me?" Even though his name isn't really Hope. So there's that. A lot of my hope comes from my children. I yeah, a lot of it comes from them, from all the potential I see in them, or the just like joy in them and the way that they just love you. Um, as I'm a parent right now, which is probably why I've gained so much more empathy from my parents. When I do a stock of my parenthood, I see so many so many mistakes, so many things that I'm like, oh, I wish I had done that differently, or I wish I would do that differently. And a lot of the time when people say, Mubanga, you're such a great mom, it's a nice thing to hear. But I feel like the only people who can truly give that assessment are my children. And yeah, that they give me a lot of hope. They're not here right now. Otherwise, if they were, they would chime in. They would say, are you talking about us? Um, yeah. I'm trying to read Fisher's question. When did I know that I could do I knew I could do it. I just wasn't very keen on it. I think what it took was me finding books that I enjoyed. Um, because someone said only a reader ever became a writer. So when I found books that I really, really enjoyed in poetry, then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something I could do. But also for my initial poetry class, our final assignment was to write a chapbook of poems. I think we had to do 9 or 11, between 9 and 11 poems. So that's where I wrote Unmarked Graves, my chapbook of poems. But something else happened in that class. So I the yeah, I didn't fully enjoy that class in the way that I would enjoy my prose classes, and some of my peers were very condescending about the fact that I wasn't initially a poet when I joined the class. So they would make a lot of like sideways remarks about the things that I say about poetry. And because I am who I am, when I finished the class, I said I'm gonna get this chapbook published just to annoy the people who didn't like my poetry in class. So I started submitting it to a bunch of different places. Fisher knows me. That I like if I intend to like, oh, I want this thing to get published. I started submitting to a lot of different places, and Tascalum University loved my chapbook and it got published. And I kept my promise to myself true. So I sent it to everybody who had said something terrible about my poetry in class. Yeah. I can't think of, oh, I feel of all the things. Now I can't think of any titles. Which book did I enjoy? Mm, the one that I'm remembering that really opened things up for me in that class was Wound from the Mouth of a Wound. I'm gonna look up the name of the author. The author was a Minnesota-based author at the time. I don't know if they're still here. Yeah, that's the one that's coming up to my mind first. Yeah. Will my current autoethnographic research on Zambian married women come out as a work of fiction or poetry, or is it purely scholarly dissertation? Um, I write about AIDS everywhere. It's all over my work. So you probably see a little bit of it in my poems. And the way that I've been writing my papers at school is that I've been starting them with a proverb also, but then I've been following them up with a poem before I actually start my scholarly argument. And then I have a book coming out next year, which is in direct conversation with the work that I'm doing in my research. So my novel is, you can read my novel and you get like an introduction to the research that I'm doing. So there'll probably be a combination of all those things. But the structure will probably lean more into a scholarly dissertation just so I can graduate. Um, yeah, but I'm a while away from that. PhD take ages here. So yeah.
Okay. Um, any last words from Rafias before we make our? I think we have 6 minutes left now. So
Yes, we're very good on time. Mubanga, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed discussing your works with you.
Me too.
And again, I have to say it's just beautiful hearing you read your poems as opposed to reading them in my head. It feels like a totally different
So now
experience.
you can speak them, but you are fluent.
No. Okay, maybe a quarter fluent. Yeah, I've learned thanks to you.
Okay.
But yes, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I'm just looking forward to reading more of your works. Shibikisha is coming out next year. That's what you were referring to, that speaks in
Mhm.
conversation with your work, and I'm really excited to see what else you bring. We're also learning more Bemba proverbs.
Yeah,
And
that's my
yeah. That's your mission. You're succeeding. Thank you so much. And thank you to Brown Bamboo as well. Thanks, Jide.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us, and thanks for everyone who came and for the questions.
Yes, I see familiar faces here. Thank you everyone for coming. And everyone who has attended this interesting conversation. Thank you, Rafiat, for hosting Mubanga. It's very, brilliant writer. And first time we are meeting, but I think I'm much more interested in the kind of work you do now. I'm going to be picking your books. Read.
Thank
Very
you.
nice. So you can actually plug your book link in the chat box, and someone might be interested in picking a title you have written. Please plug the link in the chat box so that we can go directly to your publisher website or Amazon. Just pick a copy, right? Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We appreciate you. We hope to upload this particular conversation on YouTube very soon. I can't promise, but I will speak to someone who will help me, assist me on that. So I'm very grateful for this kind of conversation on African poetry. So I think we will close the chapter now, and we can always catch up on social media and share the interesting thing that's going on in our life, especially our literary life. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone as well. Bye.